What I want to talk about for this third session of our training sessions is an argument based on a little booklet that I've passed out for many of you. I think most of you have a copy of the booklet, The Evidential Value of the Observance of the Lord's Day by Mcgrew. This is a condensed presentation of an argument that you can find elsewhere in the literature, and if you will email me, I will send you many more references that you can track down so that you can see this in its fullness elsewhere. I want to start with a question about how we can be sure that any past event has taken place. How can we know that something really took place in the past? And after we lay down some rules for making that kind of a judgment, I want to do a thought experiment with you about what would happen if we had lost all of the Gospels and all direct quotations of the Gospels, but we knew some things from the rest of the New Testament. And what would we infer? How could we reason about all of this? And then see how what we find in the Gospels fits like a key in a lock for that. Back in the late 1600s, there was a British nobleman, the Duke of Leeds, who was a kind of cultural Christian, but complained to a clergyman that there should be some simple line of argument that didn't require vast learning and knowledge and biblical languages and things like that, that could persuade a man that Christianity is true. The person to whom he said this was Charles Leslie, and the Reverend Charles Leslie sat down and produced in a short time a work on the subject in which he put forward 4 rules for determining whether an event has, in fact, taken place. And Leslie's 4 rules are these. If you want to be sure that an event has taken place, see if it meets these criteria. It has to be an object of the senses. It has to be the kind of thing that men's eyes and ears can be the judges of. Not some private vision, not a dream. It has to be an object of the senses. That's the first rule. He's not saying that if somebody says he had a dream, you can't believe it. The question is not whether these rules are necessary for our believing something. He says, however, if they're all met, they are sufficient. So the first one, something that men's outward senses can judge of. Second, it has to be something public. There has to be more than just one person who maintains it if it's to meet the standard that Leslie is putting forward. The resurrection is an event that qualifies as public here. Not in the sense that it happened out in front of the temple and the Sanhedrin were invited to come down and chat with Jesus for a while, but in the sense that there were multiple people involved. Why are these 2 rules important? Because they preserve people at the time that it's supposed to have happened from being imposed upon by somebody who says, yes, well, I had a vision of angels or of this or of that. This helps to secure us against any error at the time that the event is said to have transpired. The third requirement is that there be some acts or monuments to commemorate the event. A monument might be something as simple as the monument that we've got erected for the Battle of Bunker's Hill. An act would be some kind of ceremony, and we have these, right? You know that the Declaration of Independence was signed on what day? July 4th. How do we know this? Because ever since then, we've been celebrating Independence Day. That's an act commemorating something that's an object of the senses and public, and finally, the time at which the act or monument was instituted should be back in the era when the fact, the event, is supposed to have taken place. These two considerations secure us against being imposed upon somewhere in the history of transmission. If I say to you, what are your family's traditions for Stupendous Day on March 17th that you've been celebrating and your grandparents have been celebrating, you look at me like I'm a madman, because there is no such thing as the March 17th celebration of Stupendous Day. And you'll know it right away. If I try to put it over on you and say, oh no, well that's the day that, and I make something up, I have no hope of inducing you to believe that you have always been celebrating and have been told by your ancestors that they celebrated time immemorial some completely bogus act commemorating this. I can't invent it and impose it upon you. So what Leslie said was these four things, which I've arranged down to spell out the word past in case you like acronyms, are four criteria which, if they are all met, assure us that an event has taken place. That's the framework. Now, let's see what we can do by way of application. We want to know whether the resurrection took place. The resurrection was supposed to have been a physical event open to the senses. People saw Jesus, touched Jesus. He had to tell Mary, stop hanging on to me. I'm not gone yet. It was public in the required sense that multiple people attested it. But is there some kind of act instituted at the time commemorating it? Well, what if we didn't have the Gospels? What could we figure out? Let's look at the change of the day of worship from the Jewish Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, to the first day of the week. Now, this is something that we find referred to in the literature of the Church Fathers. Council of Nicaea in the year 325 gets together and they issue a solemn declaration. And the declaration is, since on the Lord's Day, some people worship by standing and some people worship kneeling, for the sake of uniformity, we're going to say everybody should do this standing. Notice what they're not arguing about. They're not arguing about the question, should we be worshiping on the Lord's Day? Right? They're taking that for granted. That is an established fact. Well, how far back can we take that? That's 325. At about that same time, Eusebius has a commentary on the Psalms, and he writes, I think that he means the psalmist, describes the morning assemblies in which we are accustomed to assemble throughout the world. By this is prophetically signified the service which is performed very early and every morning of the resurrection day throughout the whole world. Okay, so he's using that as a given fact, this is performed throughout the whole world, and saying he thinks he sees maybe in the Psalms a prefigurement of that. Whether he's right or wrong about the Psalms is not the issue. The issue is he's just taking it for granted that, of course, this is the day of worship. Well, let's move back to Justin Martyr in the 2nd century. So we'll take a leap here of about 160 years backwards to approximately the year 150 or so. And on the day called Sunday, you'll remember I read this passage before, all who live in cities or in the country gather together in one place, and the memoirs of the apostles or the writings of the prophets are read as long as time permits. And then he goes on, Sunday is the day on which we all hold our common assembly, because it is the first day on which God, having wrought a change in the darkness and matter, made the world, and Jesus Christ, our Savior, on the same day rose from the dead. This is the First Apology, chapter 67. So, right back there, smack in the middle of the first century, we see that. But we can go further back. Ignatius wrote a number of epistles, and Bishop Lightfoot did brilliant work in showing the authenticity of these in what's called the Curatorium, the middle recension. So in his epistle to the Magnesians, a letter like the letters of Paul, he writes, If then those who had walked in ancient practices attained unto newness of hope, no longer observing Sabbaths, but fashioning their lives after the Lord's day, on which our life also arose through him and through his death. And then he goes on to make another point. You see what he's doing? This is around the year 107. Some people say, no, it could be as late as the teens. I think they're wrong. But for my point, it would matter very little here. This is an extremely early, very explicit discussion of the Sabbath and its antiquity. All Christian writers so far. Let's look at what someone who's not a Christian has to say. Pliny the Younger, Roman governor in what would be modern-day Turkey, Bithynia, is writing a letter because he's not sure what to do about these Christians. So he writes to Trajan and he says, these people that he's arrested, they were accustomed to meet together on a stated day before it was light and sing among themselves alternately a hymn to Christ as God. When these things were performed, it was their custom to separate and then to come together again to a meal which they ate in common without any disorder. He's mainly concerned with the question, is this a seditious group getting ready to launch some kind of a revolt against the government? And all of the evidence he's getting out of torturing a couple of them is, no, they just get together and they sing hymns to Christ as to God, and then but it's all on a stated day. It's all organized. It's all done very orderly. I don't know of any historian of the Church Fathers who does not believe that the stated day was the first day of the week. Didache is teaching of the apostles. This gives directions for Christian communities, and one of the directions it gives, Didache 14, says, on the Lord's day, gather yourselves together and break bread and give thanks, first confessing your transgressions, that your sacrifice may be pure. On the Lord's own day. But we can go further back. We can move into the New Testament itself. So Revelation 1, verse 10. What do we read the author of Revelation saying? I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So the expression's already taken hold so much that John can write that in a writing that is to be sent out to the churches without a word of further explanation, and they will all understand what he's referring to. But we can also go further back. Revelation was written somewhat later than Acts. Acts 20, verse 7 says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. We have all the excitement with that. But notice just that passing reference, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread. Do you see the correspondence between that and what Pliny says? On a stated day, they gathered together, and then they would disperse and meet again to break bread. This is all coordinating. But we can nail this down even apart from the testimony in Acts, because Paul, in 1 Corinthians 16, is telling them how to take the collection for the saints in Jerusalem. And what does he say? On the first day of every week, Each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so there will be no collecting when I come. Why the first day of every week? Because that's the day when they're meeting to worship. What's another name for that day? It's the Lord's Day. So from all of these quotations, both outside and within the New Testament, both Christian and pagan, we get this consistent picture that Christianity was focused for its worship on the first day of the week, and that day was called the Lord's Day. Why should this be surprising? So they decide to do that. People can decide to meet on Thursdays. We have Wednesday night prayer meeting. What's the big deal about this? Well, here's the big deal. The earliest Christians were very largely Jews. And the Jews were fanatical about the observance of the Ten Commandments. And one of those Ten Commandments, about which they were remarkably insistent, is the keeping of the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And there are various reasons, not contradictory to each other, but complementary, why the Sabbath day would be a very important day to remember and to keep holy. Well, Paul is participating in this. He's a Hebrew of Hebrews, a highly educated Jew. He's extremely zealous, he says, for the traditions of my fathers. And yet, when do we find Paul getting together with believers? Not on the day that is in accordance with the tradition of his fathers. He's getting together on the first day of the week. On the Sabbath, he'll go into the synagogues and reason with the Jews. He's not shy about doing that. But that's not the day when he gets together with fellow believers to worship, right? When he goes to Troas, when do they meet? What does it say? On the last day that I was in Troas, it says on the first day of the week we met. How about John? He's a peasant Jew of Galilee. He's so devout that even as a Christian, he continued to celebrate Pentecost, right? Acts 2, John's right there. He's with the group at Pentecost. He continues to frequent the temple. He observes Jewish hours of prayer. He conforms to Jewish usages. This is Acts 2:46, Acts 3:1. So John's very committed to observing these things, but he is the author of Revelation, who casually refers to the Lord's Day. What's up with that? Paul had just celebrated Passover in Acts 20, right? So he's clearly still willing to celebrate these Jewish feasts. But Paul meets with his fellow believers on the Lord's Day. Why was the meeting of the church on the first day of the week established throughout the entire Roman Empire in an era when Christianity was still largely a Jewish phenomenon? Why didn't they say, well, if you guys want to meet on Tuesdays, that's cool with us? Nobody even seems to have suggested that. There's no whiff of that, no hint of that. But there's more. The Jews have a number of feasts. Some of them are greater than others. There is not a single Jewish feast that is named for any person. There's no feast for Abraham. There's no feast of Moses. There's no feast for David, their greatest king. There's no feast of Solomon. There's no feast of Judas Maccabeus, even though he restored their national dignity in some measure. There's no feast of the Jews whatsoever named after a person. But we've got this curious designation, the Lord's Day. Mcgrew, in this little booklet that I've given to you, says, what powerful and constraining motive could have induced men trained in Judaism to detach themselves from every association of the past and, passing by the honor due to the time-honored Sabbath, advance higher claims to observance for a day hitherto unheard of in connection with sacred memories? How come they did that? That is an act commemorated every week. That's the day of their meeting every Sunday. You know, we get up Sunday, okay, it's time to go to church. If you're rushed getting out the door and you have a large family, this might be a cause of some tension. Get out here, come on. No, you don't need to comb your hair another time. Just get in the car. But we forget that we're participating in a celebration of something world-changing from their perspective. What could that be? Well, if we'd lost the Gospels and had only fragments of the rest of the New Testament, but enough to have these bits, we would have to say something very striking happened. That's one act, but we've got two. Because at varying intervals, as often as we do it, we also celebrate a memorial to the Lord's death, right? Richard Dawkins, one of our time's top theologians, quotes a quip from Lenny Bruce, the comedian, saying, yeah, if Jesus had been killed today, Catholic school kids would be wearing little electric chairs around their necks. He speaks more truly than he knows. Why does that even seem funny? Because that's just ridiculous. This is an instrument of torture. This is an instrument of death. It's not something to be celebrating. Exactly right. Exactly right. Spot on. And so's the cross. It's not only a horrifying and disgusting way for someone to die, a really, truly sadistic invention. It's also a specific shame from the perspective of a Jew. Because from a Jewish point of view, Deuteronomy 21:23 tells us, everyone who hangs on a tree is accursed. And this is how Second Temple, first century Jews took crucifixion. This is hanging on a tree. And we see that expression then through the New Testament, right? Galatians 3:13, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. But this is what happened to Jesus. If you were trying to start a cult, asking people to join with you in celebrating a memorial of the criminal death of someone in a particularly vivid, gruesome, horrifying fashion would not be the way to do it. That would not be the place to go. But this institution has been with us all the way back. How could this institution of the Lord's Supper, as well as of the Lord's Day, have been founded? Jesus certainly wasn't a conscious imposter in this. You can't exactly plan the means and method of your own death like that, and it would be a non-starter as a way to start a cult. His disciples wouldn't have continued to follow him. And in particular, if any were crazy enough to, they probably wouldn't have kept this commemoration. And if they did, they wouldn't have been able to get anybody to join them. The earliest Christians passed their lives in labors and dangers and sufferings which they undertook voluntarily. Not all of them probably died in the way that ecclesiastical history has told us they did, but they all knew that they faced a completely unfriendly world. The Jews certainly weren't friendly. They just procured Jesus' crucifixion. The Jewish leadership was dead set against them and remained implacably so. The Romans had sanctioned his crucifixion. They couldn't look for any help there. And Christianity, like Judaism, was an exclusive religion. In Rome, the basic idea was live and let live. You got your gods? That's cool. I got my gods. You don't spit on my gods. I don't spit on your gods. You worship your gods. I worship mine. In fact, a piece of advice that they would often give was, you know, if you move to a new city, just take up whatever the local gods are there. That's cool. It's not that they're not pious about it. It's that they're very pluralistic. And like Judaism, Christianity was absolutely exclusive. There is no other name under heaven given among men by which you must be saved. So they had to know that they could not look for any help from either Judaism or the Roman Empire. This is going to have to make its way on its own. Knowing that, they voluntarily submitted to it, and they voluntarily engaged in this celebration of the Lord's Supper. What does that tell us? What does that mean? Well, maybe he wanted to make his death a glorious martyrdom. Well, if he did, he failed spectacularly from a human standpoint. Getting crucified wasn't the way to do it. The way to do it was to lead a revolt against the Romans and die in the middle of the revolt. At least Bar Kokhba did that, right? But no, that's not what he did. And Mcgrew here has a very trenchant comment. This is for this booklet on page 35. It steeled no national cause, it crowned no patriotic uprising, it recalled no daring enterprise vainly though courageously undertaken against the Roman power. The bandits, indeed, who died by the side of Christ were not improbably regarded by the bystanders as mockers. We read of no mockery of them. We hear of no bitter gibes cast into their teeth. Blasphemy and scorn were reserved for him who occupied the central cross. His death was the last drop in the cup of a complete and crushing disappointment of all the hopes and aspirations of his followers. Were they likely to enshrine in such an institution as the Lord's Day what could have been only the tale of their defeat, the memory of their error? And the Lord's Supper would just cement that. You do show, it's not even about the resurrection. You do show the Lord's death until he comes. The gospel, with its focus on the cross, is a stumbling block to the Jews, and it's folly to the Gentiles. But the commemoration of Jesus' death and the commemoration of something that happened on the first day of the week, powerful enough to take devout Jews and transform them so thoroughly that the first day of the week becomes a celebration and a day of worship for them, cries out for an explanation. If we find in the Gospels an adequate explanation for these facts in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, transforming the death into the conquering of death, that is nothing more than an adequate explanation. If we don't accept that explanation, we have no explanation whatsoever. That's a line of argument that is independent of the veracity of the gospel authors about this or that detail. It's independent, in fact, of their identity. But it's a line of argument that I think is worth our bringing forward, reiterating, and pressing on. That's what I have on that. I'll let you guys ask me some questions now, because I've gone on at some length here.
Now, all right, I got a question.
Shannon, okay, go for it.
It seems like I remember some kind of strange objection about Sunday as being chosen as the Lord's Day because of something that Constantine did, trying to emulate worship of Apollos and trying to kind of synthesize those two things together.
Sure, when's Constantine reigning?
A long time after,
right.
300.
4th century, 300s. And yet I just cited you piece after piece after piece of evidence, both Christian and pagan, both outside and inside the New Testament, showing that this goes all the way back. So whatever Constantine may have done formally, he chose to do because that would be the least disruptive way of his instituting this law. I make no argument from what happens after Constantine. Once you get the empire on your side, you can plead, hey, well, I mean, people had to do this. The emperor told them to. But until that time, that argument's not available. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So that's why I take it back and back and back and back and back, and why I have bored you all to death by reading one after another these pieces of information from church history, because these show that it's not just the invention of Constantine. And I'll give you all these notes if you want them. I'll share these with you, but a lot of this is in Mcgrew anyway. Go.
Would Mormonism meet this criteria back here?
No, and for a beautiful reason. When Joseph Smith's, I believe it was his brother, here I can actually pull this up. Yeah, I've got this right here. This is from the Deseret Weekly from 1894.
You like that old stuff.
I do. Brother Briggs then handed me a pencil and asked Brother Smith, Joseph Smith's brother, if he ever saw the plates his brother had had from which the Book of Mormon was translated. He replied, I did not see them uncovered, but I handled them and hefted them while wrapped in a tow frock and judged them to have weighed about 60 pounds. I could tell they were plates of some kind, and that they were fastened together by rings running through the back. Their size was as described in Mother's history. Brother Briggs then asked, did any others of the family see them? Yes, said he. Father and my brother Samuel saw them as I did, while in the frock. Okay? So did Hiram and others of the family. Question, was this frock one that Joseph took with him especially to wrap the plates in? No, it was his everyday frock, such as young men used to wear then. Didn't you want to remove the cloth and see the bare plates? Said Brother B. No, he replied, for Father had just asked if he might not be permitted to do so, and Joseph, putting his hand on them, said, no, I am instructed not to show them to anyone. If I do, I will transgress and lose them again. Besides, we did not care to have him break the commandment and suffer as he did before. Did you not doubt Joseph's testimony sometimes? Said Brother Briggs. No, was the reply. We all had the most implicit confidence in what he said. Do you see the problem with public here? I'm quoting this from a Mormon newspaper.
Wow.
I'm not making this up. This is their newspaper. This is their reportage. This is their source. What can I say?
Killer.
More. Anything else? Patrick.
So on this line of thought, this argument is based on the premise of partly understanding the importance of the Sabbath to the Jews and
Correct.
the significance of the early Jewish believers with the resurrection. Just kind of a broader question or topic is when we're dealing with Christians that say are average Christians, go to church every week, are familiar with most Bible stories to some degree, and we're wanting to introduce apologetics more to them.
Right.
How would you recommend we start instilling the understanding of the Jewish background? I know teaching Old Testament's good, but I mean, there's just so much there. And like new believers, you're only focused on New Covenant. So how do you, where do you recommend you start throwing more and more Old Covenant, Old Testament, and the understanding of the difference of the two?
It depends on what avenues you've got available. If you're the pastor at the church, I would recommend putting a little bit of the Jewish background in every time it seems appropriate. And for that purpose, a book like Craig Keener's New Testament Bible Background Commentary is an excellent resource because wherever you're preaching from, he's got notes on the whole thing. You can find something. Give him just a little piece, a piece at a time. Explain the importance of that for understanding what's going on. Don't belabor it. Don't turn it into a here's all about Judaism lecture. Give them a piece at a time. Move on. If you're a Sunday school teacher, you could very easily put together a really good set of Sunday school lessons on understanding the Jewish context of Jesus. And there's enormous amounts of material available for doing that. Talk to me if you want suggestions. I'd be glad to help. If you're working with believers in smaller groups or one-on-one, I give you the same advice that I gave to somebody who's in college ministry and was saying, well, you've got all this stuff and I love it. There's no way we're going to get these students to absorb all this material. I said, of course not. That's fine. I said to him, give them something and tell them where to find more. One of the reasons that I gave you guys these little booklets is that they're easy. I'll give you the PDF files for them. If you want to print your own, the covers it's not rocket science. You go down to Lowe's and you buy one of those long staplers that can do booklets. Set it at 5.5 inches, which is half of your 11-inch sheet of paper. Staple, fold, and you're good. So all you need is Adobe Acrobat with a booklet printing option. I'll give you the files, and then you can hand that to somebody who wants a not dauntingly long, not a Craig Keener-sized piece of work, but something that's 40 pages long, 50 pages long. Yeah, some of these are called present-day tracts. That word meant something different back in that era. It meant something written by people with doctorates that took the time to unfold a line of argument and give you the footnotes and all that. I love it. I'm a man out of time. I belong in that era. But I would say give them something if they show enough interest. There's a little booklet here that I've included. I'm not really going to lecture on it, particularly called The Four Gospels from a Lawyer's Standpoint. This guy's not a theologian. He's just a lawyer. He's accustomed to evaluating evidence. And he runs through the Gospels. What do I see as someone whose life has been spent weighing and judging evidence? This would make an awesome basis for a series of talks in a church. And I think Bennett would love to have you do it. He died in the 1890s, so he's not going to sue you for stealing his work. Go for it. Take it. Make use of it. But I would say that, those are the first things that come to my mind. Is that a fair answer, Patrick, to your question?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Cold case Christianity before cold case Christianity was around, huh?
Yeah.
From a lawyer perspective.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how many lawyers have been interested in the evidences of Christianity. There's a long history, actually, of lawyers who have engaged with that. I could pull up a list. I've got such a list somewhere. Somebody asked me about this, and I wrote up. So let's just see if I can find it. This will be fun. I don't know. Yeah, let's see. Simon Greenleaf, Howard Hyde Russell, Edmund Bennett, author of this little book. Walter Chandler, Francis Jones Lamb, Joseph Evans Sagebeer, all lawyers who wrote extensively on the evidences of Christianity. Joseph Butler, the great Anglican divine, author of The Analogy of Religion, took a degree in law before becoming a priest and then later a bishop. So, yeah, William Paley he wasn't a lawyer, but he used to hang out with the lawyers all the time, and his mind has a definite legal turn to it, as you'll see if you read his works. Same thing with Thomas Sherlock. So yeah, there's a very long tradition. It's not just J. Warner Wallace, God bless him, I'm glad he's doing what he's doing, but there's just an enormous wealth of material here. And the lawyers have definitely done their part. Anything else?
More of a personal question. I hope
Okay.
you don't mind, but what books, if you had to give a top 5 of a must-read for the lay apologist who, the top 5, you've got to have these things. What would you?
All of Lardner and Keener 7000. No, seriously. I would say it's going to depend to some extent on what interests you most. Different people are going to want to specialize in different things, and my advice to you is do not try to become the master of everything, right? We already have one of those. His name is William Lane Craig. God bless him. The rest of us should specialize. And when we specialize, we should pick something that's a legitimate line of evidence or argument and dig in a bit. And so I don't have a one-size-fits-all suggestion. If you're interested in the historical argument for the Gospels, I would say you should read William Paley's book, A View of the Evidences of Christianity. It's fantastic. If you're looking for something that can inspire someone who has an interest in Christianity, but perhaps just has never really been exposed to apologetics, there's an old free book by Thomas Cooper called The Bridge of History Over the Gulf of Time. Cooper was raised a Christian, was a lay minister in the Methodist Connections for a while, lost his faith, went through a very dark period, published an atheist journal for a time in which he sort of laid out for ordinary folk the arguments of Strauss's Life of Jesus, very critical of the Gospels. But around 1855, he had doubts about his doubts. He rethought the whole matter. He came back to Christianity. He devoted the rest of his long life to giving sermons and lectures on the evidences of Christianity. And we have his travel log, where he notes every place he went. He makes Bill Craig look like a slacker.
Wow.
He gave more than 6,800 lectures and sermons on the evidences of Christianity. I mean, even Jay Watts is going to have to scramble to keep up with that. Jay only did 17 this week, in 3 days. No, this is crazy. But this book, The Bridge of History, is a transcript by him of some of the lectures that he gave. And the beautiful thing is, it's disguised a little bit as a history lesson. He takes you back across each of the arches of the Bridge of History, his own century, the 19th, and then into the 18th, and into the 17th. And he tells you all kinds of interesting details about every century. So you learn something about the framework of history. But in every case, the question is, where did Christianity come from? How do we find it here? Oh, wait, it looks like it's dependent on something earlier. Okay, well, let's move back. He talks about that century, and then he moves back. And he's a brilliant, engaging lecturer. I gave this book to my brother, who had asked me for something to give him a better sense of the framework of history, how that works. So here's a really nice book. Sneaky of me. And a couple of nights later, he called me up on the phone screaming violently for more.
Wow.
Because Cooper writes like a man. There's no kind of limp-wristed mamby-pamby apologizing for apologetics. He's a man who's been into skepticism and he's found his way back. And he has no time for wasting time. He's blazing the trees to show you the path by which he found the way out of the wood of doubt. And he points you back to people like Paley and Lardner and says, go, read these books. If I can inspire you to read these books, then I will have fulfilled my task. So that could do it for some people. That book might be the perfect point of entry. For other people, maybe you just need to say, there is this thing called Lardner's Credibility of the Gospel History. It needs to be updated in a few places, but start in, because you're going to learn an awful lot by reading that. The problem about the census in Luke 2, verses 1 and 2, you're all familiar with that, right? Well, Quirinius wasn't governor until later. Lardner's got 86 pages, large pages, small print, devoted to a meticulous analysis of every aspect of that, all the solutions that have been proposed, which ones he thinks are viable, his own twist on one of them as his own preferred solution. It's a map of the entire argument. That's all just about 2 verses. So it's an astonishing wealth of material. For some people, something by Lee Strobel, like The Case for Christ, will be the perfect point of entry. It'll have enough information to pick their interest, but it won't overwhelm them. He's got this very engaging style. Some people might need something like J. Warner Wallace's book. Some people may want to know not so much the historical details, but how do I engage talking with people about my Christian convictions? Greg Kokel's book, Tactics, is the go-to place for that. I can't imagine any other book I would recommend if that's your question, that's what you need. So it all depends so much on what you need, but there's no shortage of resources. Most of them, I can get you the old ones for free. And I tried. You have 6. Tell me if you want more on any of these topics. I'd be glad to send you more. Any more questions on this one? Sure.
You've said many times we can tell you and you'll send us more. What do you need from us in order to send?
Get my email address, send me a note, tell me what you're interested in, and I will send you a large selection of PDF files on anything that I've got information on. So if you want, say, the virgin birth, I'll say, well, here, have Orr and Thorburn and Sweet, and I'll pass you these. These are great resources on that time. No, I want something on the resurrection, but I want it, to be really systematic. I don't just want preaching about the resurrection. I want an argument. Great. here's Kennedy, here's another book by Orr, here's, and I'll pile you up with that. Oh, I want a book on the significance of the resurrection, sort of looking forward. What does this tell us beyond its mere apologetic significance? Westcott, The Gospel of the Resurrection. That's the book you want. And I'll either give it to you free and let you translate all of the Greek and the Latin and the French and the German yourself, or I will tell you to pick up the copy from D. Ward Publications, which I edited for them, where the Greek and the Latin and the French and the German are translated for you. So take your pick. If you like free, take it in the original. I'll send you the PDF. If you want it translated with a little introduction by yours truly, I'll give you that. So go, but just tell me what you want. Send me an email note. I want to be your research assistant. I will help you.
One other question along
Sure.
those lines. You've mentioned PDFs. My ebook reader will not read a PDF to me out loud. Do you have any in text format?
Will it not even read one that has an OCR layer put over top of it?
It will if it has the OCR layer.
Then tell me what you need, and if I have a clean enough copy that it doesn't sound like your deaf uncle, right? I will put an OCR layer over it, and then I will send it to you that way. So just ask, and I will do that.
Not to state the obvious, but what is your email address?
Matt,
Turn off the cameras.
talk to Matt. Turn off the cameras. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but yeah.
Ronnie, what's yours?
Wait, we want your social number and your birth certificate. Yeah. All right.
Some of the stuff we've already posted on the Tactical Faith affiliates, like the William Paley's Evidences for Christianity. You can find that as Google Docs
And actually,
in several different
in
formats.
our Grassroots Apologetics Day last summer, he went over what you didn't know about. He actually went over this whole list of things for you to specialize in.
Yeah.
Because that's what he covered to us last year.
I'll send you a copy of that, or they've got probably up on the website. So
PDF, all these things that you can specialize in.
Oh, goodness.
yeah, with references, most of them with links to free resources in each topic. So we got you covered.
Yeah.
Shall we take a little break and then come back in 15 minutes?
That's great.
Let's do it.